So this is a video that's been requested a lot by people privately, and that is of course going to be Vorian and how he works. So there's been a bit of a delay with it because I was trying to work out exactly how his RTS skills worked, and then later on when we could test properly in All Out War, because I could only test before in Lost Realm, I realized they weren't working, and I was waiting for them to be fixed, which, as you can see, was a bit of a struggle, but we did get that, and to be fair to them, they did fix it quite quickly, actually, after me just absolutely flooding the VIP with replies like this and videos of it and stuff. But he works now, and whilst he won't be purchasable by anyone for a good while yet, I think with Sorara he was added 3 months after his will to the Corolla event, the DICE event, and to PAX 4 months after his will. So if that same timeline applies to Vorian, he'll likely be in PAX in August. But I have here, as you saw, all the possible information on him, and we'll go into exactly what he does, and obviously how good he is. So up here you have all his stats, all his details. It's an exact copy of what Sorara did, but for infantry. He also only has combat rate in Tavern, which is kind of annoying, is no leadership. The main niche of his stats there being the Imp versus Cav damage, so that will take you from 50% damage dealt to Cavalry with Infantry to 74% damage dealt with Infantry to Cavalry by default, which makes a really big difference, and I'll show that lower down. And to the left here is his Awakening ability. All the report analysis will be primarily pulled out of this report here, just because I had it saved. And you can see, just like Sorara, he is incredibly bloated in what his ability does. So there is a lot of things here that he's doing. So all allied infantry lineups inflict bleed that lasts for 5 seconds after every 3 normal attacks they launch. So he's mass applying bleed, increases the crit chance of troops brought by Vorian by 40% at 180% coefficient. So that's the equivalent of John Weapon at 3-star. And then also each time an allied lineup triggers a critical hit, it gains the damage reflection effect. The next time it suffers an attack from troops, it reflects 50% of damage taken to the attacker, stacks up to 5 times. So I'm going to go through each of these individually and show exactly how they work. The first one is the bleed application, and this is probably the most significant part of his Awakening ability. So if we look here down at the report lines, C4 attacks here, and that triggers Sonara to make C4 attack again, and again. And you'll see here, Vorian will apply a bleed after those 3 normal attacks, and then again after these 3 next normal attacks. That might seem like common sense, but the fact that it triggers off of Sonara extra attacks as well is very important, because not everything does. Things like Barrett and Merrill do not. So the fact that it does is a huge upward swing in damage for what Vorian is actually bringing, and the bleed will just be applied on the lineup that is attacked by that 3rd attack which triggers Vorian, so it won't repeatedly apply bleeds on the lineup opposite Vorian or anything janky like that. It will work pretty much exactly as you would expect there. Now the question with that is exactly how much damage you're going to be getting from this and how many bleeds. So I have down here the total amount of bleeds that you will get across a full fight if using 4-star Sonara weapon at least. So all the average amount of normal attacks are mapped out there. These numbers are taken from a rebel group and then multiplied up by the updated and correct formula for 4-star Sonara normals. It's annoying I can't go back and fix that in some of my previous videos, but you will on average have that many normal attacks. It will be slightly different if you're attacking someone with a wall or anything else, which can slightly adjust these timings. And it's obviously quite simple. You're just going to pretty much divide this normal attack number by 3, and that will be how many bleeds you get in total. Every bleed will be 100% damage coefficient, spread out as 20% every second, 5 seconds, so you will lose some of that value in these final few seconds where you're not getting the full duration of the bleed off, but in total it will be the equivalent of 11,700% damage coefficient, which is 111 normal attacks worth of damage, which is obviously an insane amount. In terms of bleed triggers alone, if we look down at the crit numbers, which is typically how you're previously applying bleed, where you'll have Rhea with her passive, and then every crit from Rhea and John would then apply a bleed onto that lineup. So in total, you'll be getting 43 bleeds on average from John and 36 on average from Rhea with her weapon at 4-star. That'll be a total of 79 bleeds. So you're hugely surpassing that from just this one commander alone, which doesn't even need another commander to rely on to trigger these, other than Sonara, of course, to just exaggerate them. Then you also have Vorian's crit. So Vorian's crit will only apply to his own lineup. So if you have A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, and he's A5, I think in this report I'm using he was C5, that one lineup will gain 40% critical strike chance. So as an average, it's effectively 8% critical strike chance across the full duration of the fight, which is a lot. John is 25%, but it does drop off at 25 seconds, which is about the halfway point. And it will be less crits from Vorian because it's only applying to that one lineup than you will be getting from Rhea or John, but it is still quite a significant amount. And if you pair him with Rhea, which you may or may not, and add the bleeds from his crits, he'll be providing 149 on average bleeds per fight, which is almost double what John and Rhea were bringing in that previous min-maxed infantry lineup. So this is just totally skyrocketing that top-end infantry in terms of bleed damage output, which means the bleed dragon skill becomes more important and gets more value. The bleed casino castle skins become more important and get more value. And also, the more bleed applications you're consistently getting, the more damage your Daeron will be dealing with his awakening ability. Since if an enemy is bleeded, they will take damage 1 extra time with a significantly higher damage coefficient as well. With the amount of bleeds from my testing that I was getting with John, Rhea, and Vorian as a free, you will pretty much always have 4 or 5 of the front row lineups inflicted with bleed at any given time. So you will be getting quite a big jump of damage out of Daeron as well. And you can really see how the synergies here are really interweaving to such a huge degree, where Vorian isn't just ridiculous in his own right, but he's making everything else better as well. So the damage from the crit and the bleed part of his ability will dwarf everything else available to infantry in terms of damage output, and that alone will make him the best infantry commander by quite a long way. Previously, when people asked me which commander to get first in terms of an F5 for infantry, it would always be John and then Daeron, and then after that, either Night King or Sandor or whatever else. Now, when Vorian will become more easily purchasable, he will be far, far and away the number one, and he will probably change the ordering of Daeron's priority too, honestly, because you can guarantee his value from his 4-star now through Vorian alone. So it will probably be Vorian, then Daeron, then John in terms of F5 priority, which is quite a big change. Obviously, past that, we still have even more in his kit, even then, with the damage reflect. So the damage reflect is kind of awkward in reports when you look at it. So I've had to outsource reports a bit from the initial one to show what I mean here. This was taken from, I believe, this one here, from UT, and you'll see the troop numbers are fairly similar, the stats are fairly similar, the weapons are fairly similar. It's a very evenly matched fight, with one key difference, which I will touch on afterwards. Both players here have Vorian. You have a similar amount of infantry there, attacking a similar amount of infantry. Ally lost 4,549. And the damage reflect number there, 2,355, fairly closely mirrors that 50% number. And similar here, A4 attacks A4. Ally lost 2,564 and then reflects 1,327. So pretty much exactly as the ability reads off. It gets more complicated when there are big troop disparities. So you see here 260k cav, attack, 100k infantry. Ally lost 4,000 and reflect 1,000. So it's about 3 times more troops, and the reflect is about 25% of the damage rather than 50%. Then in this other one, it's again about 3 times as many troops, but this time the reflect is 3 times the damage rather than 50% of the damage. And then again here, this is 6-7 times as many troops, yet the reflect is about 75% of the damage. So you can see it's not as simple as just directly halving the damage you take and then just dealing that back to the lineup that attacked you. The other factors at play in here, like troop tier, health stats maybe, troop numbers. It's quite complicated, to be honest, and I'm not entirely sure how to put my finger on exactly what's going on there, to the point where if I tried to, I'd just be bullshitting, honestly. So I'm not going to try and pretend like I know exactly what's happening in these mismatch situations, but it's very clear what's happening in these situations where there's roughly equal conditions on both sides, and you will actually get quite a significant amount of damage from this throughout a fight, particularly if you have Rhea in your lineup and not Night King, because you'll obviously be getting so many more crits to actually trigger the damage reflects. Something else to note of this is the reflect damage will not be consumed by anything other than a normal attack or weakness attack. It does work with weakness attacks, as you can see there, but if you're hit with a commander active, like Cersei's wildfire, bleed, dragon damage, anything like that which isn't just a direct attack from troops themselves, that will not consume the damage reflect. So that was a lot of information going over everything he does. The general TLDR is he makes the lineup self-sufficient with bleeds, even without Rhea, with just the sheer amount of them that he's triggering. That is realistically the key part of his kit, and then everything else is just a bit of bonus damage added on. Now, a key question people have had, and I definitely have had, going into his release was Rhea versus Night King. So obviously, without Rhea, all the crit from Jon, all the crit from Vorian, all the crit from Rhea herself would not become bleeds, and you would lose a lot of damage from not having all those bleeds, because as I've shown, you're having over 100 crits between these three. Jon here, his crit coefficient is 180, Vorian's crit coefficient is 180, Rhea's crit coefficient is 150. So the higher the crit coefficient, that's what the bleeds are taken from. So an 180 crit coefficient bleed is effectively the equivalent of like 2 bleeds from Vorian just directly, because the normal attack it's scaling from is just so much higher. And when you actually think that through, considering there's over 100 crits between those three, you will be losing over the equivalent of 100 normal attacks worth of damage, which is a lot. And because of that, I was very skeptical if Rhea would be the cut, because I know going into this update, obviously Sorara replaced Drake, and a lot of people just started saying Sorara replaces the healer, Vorian will replace Rhea, and then the next Cav one, which I believe it will be called Cassandra, will replace Salma, just because it's that second synergy enabler. I wasn't sure if that was the case, but from testing and experiences since his release, it does seem to be the case that just the sheer amount of troop numbers that the Night King with his 4-star weapon is bringing, because of how that scales into the normal attack damage. I think because of the anti-snowball element of Night King as well, because obviously if you start losing the fight early, you'll get a lot of troops back to sustain your damage output. That works very well with Vorian because it's quite slow-paced, because you need to stack up multiple instances of bleeds on multiple lineups simultaneously. You won't go into the first second of the fight with any bleeds applied, obviously, so your damage output will be quite slow to ramp up. I would say this report on the right in particular, they are very closely matched in terms of stats, base attacks, sizes, and you can see the Night King variant there is edging it out ever so slightly. I don't have a means to actually test this myself, because I don't have access to any account with 4-star Night King weapon. let alone one with 4-star Night King weapon and Vorian. But annoyingly for me, it does seem that the min-maxed bleed infantry lineup at this point is this 5 Night King, Sonara, John, Daeron, Vorian. I do think, though, you need the Night King weapon at 4-star realistically. I don't think base Night King weapon is really gonna justify the cost, at least. It might be equivalent value or very, very close to it, but considering the amount it requires to get Night King to 4-star gold and his weapon, you'd just be better served getting other stuff. But yeah, that 5 is the best. Then, as I alluded to earlier, how much of a difference does he make against Cavalry with that plus 24% damage from infantry to cavalry? So this report is from the 20th of April, and this report is on the 28th of April. So there's a week between these reports, and you can see the only difference in my lineup is Vorian was released, and I got Vorian. So Vorian there is replacing Sandor. The test conditions aren't perfect. This is in Arena of Honor, which means there are auto buff differences. So there will be stat differences there that there wouldn't have been here. But you can see here before the update, before Vorian, I got absolutely demolished. It is female, so there's RNG involved with Layla, Salma, all the percentages involved. But RNG can't make up that big of a difference. The swing is absolutely huge, and because of this swing, I would expect to see the game quite infantry dominated until the cavalry equivalent of these new F5s is released at the top end at least, because obviously Sorara gets countered by infantry, and you need very, very strong cavalry to actually consistently win against these top end Vorian lineups. From my own testing and things like UT, it seems that lineups with maxed out Daenerys and Cersei weapons for the disarms are what really swings it. That is so premium, though, that so few people actually have that. I mean, it's not like up here the weapons are bad, obviously. This is probably in the top 10 cavalry weapons in the game by itself. As you can see here, it's not like you're invincible. You can still lose. It just really depends on the strength difference between the accounts with army sizes, stats, base attacks, weapons, everything that goes into it. If you are sick of losing to cavalry, though, as an infantry player, this will make such an absurd difference and help so much. It will bring you to the point where the troop type counter will no longer really be your concern. Your concern will more be the disarms. Then finally, we have him in RTS. So, as I alluded to at the start, he wasn't working in RTS for 2-3 weeks after his release, and only got fixed on what have been the 4th day of All Out War, I think. Reading this, I had hoped this bleed would proc off of the blocked attacks. It does not. It only procs off your own normal attacks, which is very annoying because it means it's not synergistic with the infantry RTS commanders, and it's also not AoE damage. So at the top end in RTS, cavalry obviously has Sinel, Daenerys, Layla. The Daenerys procs have the Sinel 180% coefficient filtered into them. They can double proc off of Layla. You can have 5,400% cavalry attack quite easily stacked through Sinel's passive as well when that casts. And it's obviously hitting 5 targets. With spears, you have Airmidon now, which does synergize with normal attack commanders in the spear builds. But infantry, pretty much all your synergy within those commanders comes from being attacked and things you gain from being attacked. And Vorian doesn't synergize with that. So that is annoying, because infantry do not have AoE damage, and to make this infantry build work as well as it can at the min-max level, you've basically just got to use a rip-off version of the spear normal attack build, just without Dana's crazy spear attack stacking passive. So the most min-max lineups will be either Baelish, Daeron, Vorian, or just totally get rid of Daeron because he only stacks 400% imp attack for 3 seconds, which expires very quickly. and just run Armored on Baelish Vorian, and then just continue running that John Daeron Sonara lineup you would have previously ran on the second lineup. The damage it actually does is very significant. You can see there it's sort of ending up as the equivalent of 3 normal attacks every time it triggers. Only has a 20% proc rate though, which is why you want that Baelish realistically, just to guarantee it proccing more often. But the ceiling of this is very low compared to Cavalry and Spearmen and RTS still, unfortunately. The biggest issue is really Daeron versus Dana and Sanel. He won't be making a big difference really to you in Lost Realm damage or anything like that if you're trying to get top 3 for the refill draw. He will make you better and he will put off some of that, oh god, I am absolutely useless existential crisis, which I think all of us Inf one-trick accounts have felt in the RTS game modes. But for that price point especially, you would have been wanting more realistically, in my opinion. He needed to be insanely OP to swing the Cavalry and Spearmen dominance of a top end, but he's just good, unfortunately. But yeah, that is everything on him. There's a lot of information there. It's very complicated. In hindsight, I am quite worried about how much I have rambled my way through this. As overall takeaways, amazing commander, best infantry commander by an absolute mile at this point. If you have a progressed Night King with weapon, he will replace Rhea in your lineup rather than the Night King. If you're buying infantry F5s from scratch, the ordering I would advise would now be Vorian, then Daeron, then John, then Night King. Price considered at least, Night King will be better than John, but he's just way more expensive. If you want to counter him versus the very top end accounts, you're going to need 4-star Daenerys, 4-star Cersei weapons for the disarms, really. And because of that, I would expect things like CCS and AC to be very infantry heavy at the top end until the cavalry equivalent of Vorian and Sorara is released, at least. But yeah, there we go. That is everything there is to know about Vorian.